I grew up in a small, quiet town where life seemed to move at its own unhurried pace. At the heart of our community stood a photo studio, a place that was more than just a business. It was a living archive of our town's history, a repository of memories captured over 4 decades. The building hadn't always been a studio. Long before I was born, it was a modest grocery store, its shelves stocked with canned goods and daily necessities. But in the early 1980s, a young photographer, barely in his 30s, saw potential in the space. He took it over, transforming it into a haven for preserving life's fleeting moments. His passion for photography was infectious, and the studio quickly became a cherished part of our town. Now, 40 years later, that same photographer is in his 70s, his once thick hair replaced by a bald, weathered scalp. Time has etched lines into his face, but his kindness, his gentle demeanor remains untouched by the years. As a child, I spent countless afternoons in that studio, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. My friends and I would pile in after school, our laughter echoing off the walls. Back then, digital cameras were a distant dream, far too expensive for most. The photographer's studio was filled with film cameras, their mechanical clicks and whirs a kind of magic to us. What I remember most is how generous he was. He never hesitated to let us handle his equipment, even though film was costly and mistakes were permanent. He'd hand us a camera, show us how to frame a shot, and let us snap away, capturing blurry images of each other or the world outside the studio's glass windows. I think he saw us as more than just mischievous kids. Maybe he hoped that by letting us play with his cameras, he'd spark a love for photography, passing on his passion to a new generation. It worked, in a way. Those moments are some of the clearest memories I have from my childhood. We never saw any family around him, no wife or children stopping by the studio. Over time, we came to assume he was alone in the world, a solitary figure who poured his heart into his work and into us. To him, we were more than just the neighborhood kids. We were like the family he never had. He'd joke with us, share stories of the town's past, and patiently fix our clumsy mistakes with the cameras. His warmth made the studio feel like a second home, a place where we were always welcome. But the world changed, and so did the way we captured memories. Smartphones flooded the market, each one equipped with a camera that could produce stunning photos with a single tap. Filters and apps made it easy for anyone to create professional-looking images, and the need for a traditional photo studio began to fade. The photographer, now an old man, watched as his once bustling business dwindled. I remember visiting him one afternoon, years after I'd moved away from the town. The studio was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of old paper and chemicals. He sat behind his desk, surrounded by stacks of photos, his eyes tired, but still kind. That's when he told me he was closing the shop. The words weren't unexpected, but they hit me hard. The studio was a relic of a bygone era, and keeping it open was no longer sustainable. I didn't try to dissuade him. Deep down, I knew it was the right choice. Closing the studio would give him a chance to retire, to find peace after decades of hard. As the studio's final days approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something. I reached out to my old classmates, the ones who'd spent those afternoons with me in the studio, playing with cameras and soaking in the photographer's stories. We agreed to come together one last time to help him pack up. The task was daunting. The studio's walls and entrance were adorned with countless photos, each one a snapshot of a moment in someone's life. There were baby portraits, graduation photos, family gatherings, and weddings, all carefully framed or pinned up for display. These weren't just pictures, they were the photographer's legacy, a testament to the 40 years he'd spent capturing the town's joys and sorrows. The idea of throwing them away felt like a betrayal, not just to him, but to the memories they held. Even we, his former apprentices, couldn't bring ourselves to consider it. One of my classmates, always the problem solver, came up with a plan. Instead of discarding the photos, we'd share them online, creating a campaign called Reclaim Your Memories. The idea was simple. We'd scan the photos, post them on a dedicated social media page, and spread the word through local websites and community groups. The hope was that the people in the photos, or their families, would see them and come to claim them. It was a long shot, but it felt right. The photographer, unfamiliar with the internet, entrusted the project to us. We poured our energy into it, setting up the page, uploading hundreds of images, and reaching out to anyone who might help spread the word. To our astonishment, the campaign took off. Within days, people started contacting us, recognizing faces in the photos. By the end of the first week, over half of the pictures had been claimed. The studio became a revolving door of familiar faces, old customers who hadn't set foot in the shop in years. Each reunion was a moment of joy for the photographer. I'd catch him watching these encounters, his eyes sparkling with the same passion I remembered from my childhood. It was as if he were transported back to the early days of the studio, when every click of the shutter was a labor of love. 3 days before the studio was set to close for good, the photographer stepped out to run errands, leaving me and a few classmates to continue sorting through the remaining photos. The air was thick with dust, and our hands were smudged from handling the old prints. We were lost in our work when a faint sound broke the silence. Soft, deliberate footsteps approaching the entrance. I looked up, and there she was, a young woman, standing just inside the doorway. She paused, her gaze sweeping over us, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. It was clear she hadn't expected to find a group of young people in the studio, and for a moment, she seemed unsure whether to stay or leave. I brushed the dust off my jeans and approached her, offering a friendly smile. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, almost fragile, like a whisper carried on the wind. She said she was there to claim a photo, one that belonged to her family. I assume she'd seen our Reclaim Your Memories page and asked her to point out the photo she wanted. She moved forward slowly, her steps measured, as if she were navigating a space both familiar and foreign. Every eye in the room followed her, drawn to something intangible about her presence. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was striking. There was an ethereal quality to her, a grace that felt like it belonged to another time. It stirred a strange sense of déjà vu, as if I'd encountered her before, though I couldn't place where. She made her way to the photographer's desk, a sturdy wooden piece that had anchored the studio for decades. Above it, on the wall, hung a single photo, its edges yellowed with age. She raised a delicate hand and pointed to it. I followed her gesture and saw a wedding photo, time-stamped 1981, the year the studio opened. The groom was handsome, with a strong, square jaw and a confident smile. The bride was breathtaking, her features delicate yet radiant, her eyes holding a quiet strength. As I studied the photo, a realization hit me. The woman standing before me was the spitting image of the bride. The resemblance was uncanny, as if they'd been carved from the same mold. It wasn't just her face. It was the way she carried herself, the same timeless elegance that seemed to linger in the air around her. That's when it clicked. Her aura, that otherworldly grace, reminded me of old films I'd watched as a kid, the kind starring actresses whose beauty seemed to transcend the screen. It was the kind of presence that made you feel like you were in the presence of something extraordinary. I assumed the photo must belong to her parents and told her how stunning it was, imagining how thrilled they'd be to have it returned. She didn't respond, just offered a faint, enigmatic smile that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words. I handed her the photo, and she signed the claim form with a graceful flourish. Without another word, she turned and left, her footsteps fading into the distance. We were all left in a kind of trance, staring at the empty doorway. Her presence had been like a balm, soothing the fatigue of the day's work. We found ourselves hoping she'd return, even just to say a few words. Anything to prolong the strange calm she'd brought with her. But the moment passed, and the spell was broken when the photographer returned. He stepped through the door, his arms full of supplies, and froze when he saw our expressions. We must have looked like we'd seen a ghost, our eyes wide and searching. I shook off the disappointment and told him about the woman who'd come to claim the wedding photo. His reaction was immediate and startling. His face paled, and he dropped what he was carrying, rushing to the claim form. He stared at the signature, his shoulders rising with a tension I'd never seen in him before. Without a word, he bolted out the door, scanning the street in both directions, as if he could still catch her. When he returned, His voice was urgent, almost desperate, asking which way she'd gone. We shook our heads. We hadn't followed her, hadn't thought to. It wasn't like us to chase after someone, no matter how captivating they were. Defeated, he sank into the chair behind his desk, his eyes fixed on the empty spot where the wedding photo had hung. The air grew heavy, and we gathered around him, sensing that something profound had just happened, something we didn't yet understand. After a long, heavy silence, he began to speak, his voice low and thick with emotion. That wedding photo, he said, wasn't one he'd taken for a client. It was his own. The groom in the picture was him, 40 years younger, full of hope and ambition. The bride was his fiancée, the love of his life. They'd dreamed of building a life together, of running the studio as partners, of marrying once the business was on solid ground. But fate had other plans. Shortly after the studio opened, she was diagnosed with a terminal illness, one that stole her strength and her future. She insisted on taking the wedding photo, even as her health faded. He tried to reassure her, telling her they'd have plenty of time to do it properly when she recovered. But she was adamant, her will stronger than his protests. In the end, he gave in, and they hired another photographer to capture the moment. It was their only wedding photo, a bittersweet memory frozen in time. She passed away just weeks later, leaving him to carry on alone. For 40 years, he'd kept the studio alive, despite the mounting challenges. Every night, he'd sit at that desk, gazing at her image, drawing strength from her memory. It was as if she were still there, urging him to keep going, to honor the dream they'd shared. We listened in stunned silence, our minds reeling. The woman we'd seen, the one who looked so much like the bride, was she her ghost? And why had she taken the photo? The photographer let out a bitter laugh, tears welling in his eyes. He was convinced she'd come to punish him, to take the photo as a rebuke for closing the studio, for abandoning their dream. That night, everything changed. A fire broke out on the street, a hungry blaze that tore through several shops, including the studio. The flames consumed the first floor, destroying countless photos that hadn't yet been claimed. By some miracle, the photographer escaped unharmed, but the loss was devastating. When the fire was finally extinguished, I saw where it had stopped, just of the desk where the wedding photo had hung. If she hadn't taken it, it would have been reduced to ash. The realization sent a chill through me. But where had she taken it? What was her purpose? Years passed, and I returned to the town, curious to see what had become of the photographer. The studio was gone, replaced by a charming bed and breakfast that he now ran. It was a new chapter, one that seemed to suit him. As I stepped through the entrance, my heart stopped. There, hanging in the foyer, was the wedding photo, its frame gleaming as if it had never left. It was displayed prominently, a proud centerpiece that greeted every guest. The photographer caught my stunned expression and grinned, a warmth in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. He told me the photo had appeared on the first day the B&B opened, as if by magic. No one knew how it got there, but he believed it was her doing. She'd returned it, he said, to show him that she'd always be with him, supporting him through every new venture, just as she had in life. I left the B&B that day with a strange mix of awe and unease. The photo, the fire, the mysterious woman, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I'd never fully solve. Was she still out there, watching over him, her presence woven into the fabric of his life? As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was closer than I realized, her spirit lingering in every frame, every memory, every moment he carried forward.